First, we'd like to acknowledge that we're meeting on the land of the Kulin Nations and pay our respects to their elders, past and present. And we'd like to thank the University of Melbourne Energy Institute and our Zero Carbon Australia partners for this great venue. For anyone that hasn't been to one of these talks before, Beyond Zero Emissions was started 10 years ago as the scientific arm to climate activism. The guys that started it felt that there were a lot of activities and proposals going on in climate activism that weren't necessarily positive, that weren't science-based, and some of them were even having a negative impact. And so BZE was started to put a science focus on climate activism. Eventually that became the Zero Carbon Australia project, which is a big project to analyse all of Australia's greenhouse gas emissions, to divide them up into sectors and to research and publish solutions to all of those sectors to solve, in other words, all of Australia's greenhouse gas emissions problems. Many of those reports have been published now. There's just a couple to go. As well as that, we have a group of speakers who will make presentations at meetings of various groups. There are two BZE radio shows on community radio, and hopefully you all bought a raffle ticket tonight outside the door for raising money for those radio shows. We also put out media releases, we run education programs, and much more. We're always looking for more volunteers. We could probably do with a few more volunteer presenters at the moment, so if you think that's something you'd like to look at, we have volunteer presenter training going on at the moment. So talk to us afterwards if you're interested in that. This discussion group is a forum for climate change solutions with presentations by experts in their field, and is held on the first Monday of every month. Tonight our topic is Economics 101 for campaigners. Economist Karl Fitzgerald hosts the Renegade Economists program on Melbourne's 3CR community radio. He's also project director for a not-for-profit called Prosper, which is part of a worldwide network working for economic justice and which focuses on the effect of land speculation upon the business cycle. Karl will talk about land value capture, the traditional method of financing infrastructure that can fund BZE's high-speed rail transport plan. Karl has many insights on best practices from around the world. How could this be applied to the Melbourne Metro Rail tunnel? Then he will move on to how a more holistic economic analysis can help wind farm developments. What are the economic drivers dividing communities? And how can we all win? Would you please welcome Karl?
Yes, thank you very much. Great to be here amongst the BZE network, who have been a great inspiration for us back when Adrian Wrigley and Matthew Wright and others started BZE. You really hit the ground running, and for an organisation like mine that is celebrating its 125th annual dinner this year, it's quite something to hear of the various policy working groups you have in order, and to see the zero carbon plan come to fruition after all those years of hard work. So well done. Like you, in replacing all renewable energies, our aim at Prosper Australia is to replace all taxes on productive activity and capture the incredible monopoly rents that are prevalent in our economy. This is what drives the inequality wedge. It pushes us to the boondocks in terms of housing affordability. $450,000 with a 70-minute commute kind of scenario is what we're told these days. And land use, when you look at it from our perspective, we feel is a very important issue when it comes to climate change. So the talk will be in two parts. The Econ 101, I dare say many of you will be well versed in some of these areas, but I just thought we'd cover the bases there, and then we'll get into land value capture and all of the excitement going on between state and federal politics, and hopefully we can help tease out some of the intricacies there. So economics. The management of the household, that's as simple as it is. And it's crazy that the very word economics talks about housing and how important it is. And tonight we're celebrating the fact that Four Corners is finally doing a show on housing affordability. And our president, Catherine Cashmore, is one of the key interviewees. So some of the topics you'll be hearing tonight, you can go home and watch on TV. Of course, the oikos relates to ecology as well. So our home, this Gaia nature, we need to really reorientate the economy so that the economy flows in time with nature rather than being forced on by these higher and higher debts and these compound interests and the tax system that really penalises the workers and rewards the property speculators. So we've gone from the Middle Earth sort of flat Earth perspective to one now where we have very few people who understand the Peters world map, which of course, if you look at the top left, this is the true representation of each continent. That is how big the United States of America is versus Africa there in the yellow. The traditional map we see has been reversed so that the northern hemisphere looks more prominent, and right from the get-go on nearly every element of how we analyse society, there's a little twist that keeps reinforcing these same trends that essentially hide the fact that those who own the earth have this incredible advantage over anyone trying to run a business or earn a wage. So economics is a science that really is looking at this competition for scarce resources and how they're distributed. And it's that distribution issue that is so important when it comes to land value capture. Scarcity. This is one of the core issues, and we have this problem of the means being unable to satisfy the wants, supposedly. But when you consider that, a little example, my wife and I run a community nursery from the side of our house, and for about 5 hours a week we can produce 500 seedlings a month with some help of a few volunteers and sell them for $1 each. And still we make money. So there was talks a few years ago about there being a kale shortage as a shock horror. But so few people know now that one plant can provide you with 500 to 1,000 seeds. So how do we rebuild that connection back with the earth and understanding that it is very productive? It's really this distribution issue that forces these priorities to become harsher and harsher. So the cost-benefit analysis, of course, is what drives that priority, and this leads the market to deliver things at least cost. And it's this tension between scarcity and opportunity cost that I feel is something that really needs to be evaluated. A lot of people look at opportunity cost as the biggest issue, but then scarcity and the value that's derived from people who own particular resources that deliver these scarcity rents, such as land, such as water in the Middle East. These sort of natural opportunities deliver property owners huge windfalls. So of course here we are, we've made this big decision to spend $50 billion on submarines. What else could have we done with it? Well, that would be 2/3 of our high-speed rail cost, wouldn't it? So this market system, is it working? For some, yes. And I dare say that those who it is working for are those that do own real estate and perhaps do benefit from investment properties. But in a way, why wouldn't you do that when there are so many tax incentives encouraging you to buy and sell real estate? We try not to demonise property investors. They're only doing what the government and an array of tax incentives has encouraged them to do for so long. Some say, look, we don't need a market system, but I always say, have you ever been to a meeting that's made 1 million decisions a second? Now, the information that the pricing system conveys is just so useful, and through the report I did called Total Resource Rents of Australia, we looked at how we could channel these monopoly rents back towards financing government, replacing all taxes out there. And within that, we discovered that of everything we buy, at least 23% of every bottle of water, every computer is made up of one tax on top of another, passed on through the system. So imagine if we could pull that down to the lowest possible cost structure for the economy, we'd have an export advantage. Wouldn't it be good if we could do that in a manner that paid respect to the commons for past and present and future generations can all be looked after? So that's sort of the big picture dream of Prosper Australia, which of course is based upon the teachings of Henry George, the famous 18th century economist. So yeah, the factors of production. This is one of the big ones when it comes to economic analysis for us. When I started my economics degree, they said, look, national production, GDP, output equals labour plus capital. And a few years ago, I got to interview Professor John Freeban, who was my professor at Monash Uni, now in Melbourne, and I hit him on 3CR's Renegade Economists and saying, how come when I first went to my first class with you, you told us output equals labour plus capital, but with a month to go of the 3-year course, they said, sorry, output doesn't equal labour plus capital. And we don't know why. And there I was 25 years later asking him the question, and he said, well, Karl, I've got to admit, it's because we're not including land and the environment in that equation. And these are the 3 factors of production: land, labour and capital. The fundamentals to economics. Of course, labour earns wages, capital interest, and land rent. So land is not just what we stand on, but it does represent the water, the air, the coal, the minerals, the electromagnetic spectrum, and also any licensed monopoly. Carlos Slim in Mexico does pretty well owning the telecommunications network, doesn't he? So labour, of course, the muscle, and capital, the money. So over time, Adam Smith, of course, he mentioned the invisible hand once in the Wealth of Nations, and that's what everyone clung on to. He also mentioned a free market once only in the Wealth of Nations, that's clung on to, but terms such as land rent, ground rent, monopoly rents were all mentioned between 60 to 200 times throughout that book. So that was what he was really focusing on, and what so many of the classical thinkers recognised during this Gilded Age back in the 1800s. So through this economic history, we went through this Gilded Age. The classical economists fought back against this, and then the robber barons came through with their railroad millions in America and really changed the face of economics and the way it's taught. So here we have some of the leading figures: Adam Smith, Ricardo with his Law of Rent in 1815. There was John Stuart Mill, Karl Marx, of course, and then Henry George in 1879. And the book Progress and Poverty sold more. It was the top-selling economics book for its time, and it pretty well took what Smith, Ricardo and John Stuart Mill, who were all either employed by the aristocratic classes or worked within those industries, so they weren't so objective, whereas Henry George was a self-taught man, and he went all the way and said, look, the power of this monopoly, this ownership of location is so valuable and causes so many problems that why on earth do we have so much progress accompanied by so much poverty? A very simple solution, but it was all-encompassing. He had a huge influence here in Australia when he came to speak. I think he gave 56 lectures in about 70, 80 days back in those times, and gave a lot of intellectual backbone to the union movement that was forming at that time, and his influence led people such as Walter Burley Griffin to come to Australia, of course, design Canberra and ensure that a strong land lease component was incorporated in the plans there. So we were lucky to have Walter Burley Griffin design our first club rooms here in Melbourne in the early 1900s. So it's a story that stands the tests of time, and it's very interesting to see Malcolm Turnbull just 2 weeks ago talk about the historic nature of land value capture and how it can assist the high-speed rail project. So when the robber barons saw that George had become this global hero, sold millions of copies, the Pope had to write an encyclical to try and shoot him down, such was his popularity and the concern of the churches and their incredible land ownerships. They set up, you might see in 1885, the American Economic Association, and that cherry-picked some of the leading academics around the world to figure out a way to cover up this story. And in effect what happened was that they pulled land from the primary economic equation of output equals land plus labour plus capital to land being a subset of capital. So in terms of policy priorities, this really does limit our analysis, and so now government focuses on inflation, of course. We have to look after savings. It's always our number one priority. And the next one, of course, is unemployment. Can't have too many restless natives out there. So this desire for economic growth has not done much. I used to laugh when Wayne Swan would call it the Great Australian Economic Miracle. And still, we're at this situation where people are having to buy properties and commit to a mortgage that will take 29 years of their average earnings to pay off. And the sad thing is that in just the last year or two, our length of mortgage has been extended from 30 years to now 40, and in some instances 50-year mortgages here in Australia. So my days of joking on 3CR about Japan and their multi-generational mortgages are virtually over. And what is even more concerning is that Wall Street has opened up a new echelon in the commodification of a place to call home, with the knowledge that they basically got away with the global financial crisis and the residential-backed mortgage securities. Now they have a new form of derivative, and it's the rental-backed mortgage securities. So now they're going to corporatise the rental market, and companies such as Blackstone Capital are storming through distressed cities in America, whether it be Detroit, LA a few years ago, or through Spain, Ireland, into Japan. They're able to raise this relatively cheap, risk-free money and use that to land bank, buying two properties next to each other, planning for a rezoning windfall in another 5 or 10 years. So it's a big challenge for people who are locked out, and the challenge is that when we hear of this term tax reform, most people have been brainwashed to fall asleep And, I often say that when I tell people I'm an economist, they doze off, but when you say you're a tax reformer, they fall into a coma. So at least it's getting a lot more airplay at the moment, and there's a lot more passion and realisation that things like negative gearing and the capital gains tax discount have had damaging effects on the economy. So with this absence of understanding the role of monopoly rents, it's seen our health system become increasingly privatised. I don't know if you're all rushing off to get the last of your free blood tests before July 1, but I certainly am. I've got a reference there I've got to go and meet. Of course, education, it just kills me. I finished my degree with only $9,000 in debt, but having worked largely in the NGO sector, I paid that off just 2 years ago. These days students are finishing $40,000, $50,000 in debt, which was a deposit on a home just 15 years ago, or might have even bought your home 25 years ago. But since John Howard's capital gains tax discount in 1999, the price of real estate has skyrocketed. Even our jeans are up for sale these days. There's been a long-running battle around the world, and Malcolm Turnbull actually has written about the danger of privatising our jeans. So that's still battling through the international courts and here in Australia as to whether women should be forced to pay $3,000 for a breast cancer screening under a privatised gene structure, or $300 if it was still part of the commons. So that's what we notice about all these assets, is this old term of the commons. And it's really inspiring to see websites like onthecommons.org kick up in interest, and a lot more people recognising that so many of these root concerns we have with society come back to an understanding of the commons. And if it's not something like the commons, then it's commons-esque type thinking with the whole peer-to-peer movement. It's an amazing intellect called Michelle Bowens, B-A-U-W-E-N-S, from P2P Foundation. And there's a huge movement of people using the internet to connect and develop software, the whole 3D printing phenomenon and planned obsolescence being on notice. We're going to be able to print our own parts and replace things within our own iPhones or whatnot when they fall apart. So it's an exciting time to see this technology, see this connection of people where we're all learning online, checking things out on YouTube. You feel like something is really happening amongst the people in the face of so many great challenges from both the environment and this wealth gap, this inequality driver. So of course, you guys know what the commons are. I'm not going to spend too much time on this, but imagine the internet. We've basically privatised the internet and now the NBN. It's just so valuable, but why weren't government more far-reach, far-thinking in their planning on this? And it's just such a concern that there's not only the privacy issues, but the cost of connecting is something that we have to keep a close eye on, because all of those costs add to the pressures of running a business here in Australia. So we wonder, is that coming up? People freaked out thinking you'd be buying oxygen. Well, what's it like at the Sustainable Living Festival on a 28-degree day when you see people running to the shade? Has anyone here seen that sort of situation in parks? People start freaking out. You can feel your skin boil sometimes. That ozone hole's there. So I feel like some of these pressures are going to lead to some more radical thinking when it comes to these big challenges we have. Here we have an empty property, still empty, right opposite the Vic markets. They earn enough rent out of the teller machines there, and no doubt their property owner is every year hiring his supportive property valuer to say, look, the median increase in value was probably 60,000, but you're my mate, I know you'll make that worth $80,000 increase, won't you? And that's something that's quite a common trick amongst the well-heeled property investor, is to hire land valuers, property valuers who bump up the yearly valuation. So Goldman Sachs actually was busted doing that post-GFC. So who knows what James Packer gets up to. So when it comes to the commons, it's all being rated. Land banking's is prevalent, and here we go. This is the big report we do each year. It's called the Speculative Vacancies in Melbourne report, where we use water consumption to look at the number of vacant properties in Melbourne. And the reason we use water consumption is because it's the only utility where you are restricted in the company you can use. So in the western suburbs of City West Water, Southeast Water, Yarra Valley Water, wherever we live, we're basically stuck with those providers. And it's also something that's very hard to substitute. And the statistics when it comes to water tanks are that it really doesn't decrease people's consumption. It's only really used to maintain our desires of having a well-watered garden. So this was from a few years ago. We found 90,000 empty properties, and the higher the growth rate, I think this was in 2012. When there are good times, there are more empty properties, and then when things start to tighten up a bit, of course, investors start feeding these properties back into the market. So last year will be very interesting to see. Our figures for 2014 found 82,000 empty properties, and we're working at the moment on some geospatial analysis of the sprawl of Melbourne, where we've had the nation's most aggressive rezoning, both in the sprawl and here in the CBD, to try and provide enough housing supply so we can push prices down. And prices still went up some 10-11% here in Melbourne last year, despite the belief in this, yet again, this trickle-down housing supply theory that has come back to bite people. And what really this trickle-down housing supply theory, you probably remember them saying, look, there's no land, nowhere to build. We can't build enough homes for this record high immigration. Well, that's really code for give me the golden pen tick on my 100-acre land holding on the edge of the city and make me $50 million. So we've seen a lot of that in Fisherman's Bend, and we're going to hear about some other examples soon. So our big story is that if we had a higher land lease or a land tax on the value of our most precious resource, this sort of hoarding would not be economic. And at the moment, Australia is one of the last nations on the planet who recognises that those who own the land have this advantage over anyone trying to run a business or earn a wage. And that is why land taxes always win when it comes to the economic efficiency argument. Basically, you cannot hide land anywhere. It's very simple, and the fact is that the supply of land is fixed. So any charge that's placed on it comes out of the land price. So in a way, a land tax is a counterweight to land price and thus mortgage debt. So the higher the land tax is, the lower your mortgage debt will be. But the political problem there is those who have already bought lose out, and that's the tension that my organisation's been fighting for over 120 years. But This photo was taken in 2006, I think, right back when we first started looking at this report, and still to this day it's empty in Elizabeth Street, Richmond, just behind Victoria Street there. And of course, there's only a third of that size left now, but each year that goes up in value. And wouldn't that be nice if you could earn this money in your sleep, as John Stuart Mill used to say. So a land tax encourages people to build on it and leads to a lot of urban infill, so that all of these local councils on the sprawl aren't put into budgetary pressures to keep building new infrastructure when we should be better utilising existing infrastructure. Alright, so let's move on over to value capture and the importance of it in our transport system. So it's quite simple. We improve our transport, means we can get to the city faster, and that leads to a competition to live in that location near that train station, and higher land values result. And the question is, do we allow those to become windfall gains, or do we capture them and essentially channel them away from vested interests back towards funding a public good? And that is why value capture is so popular around the world. It's governments recognising they deserve a return on investment for their huge expenditure on these multi-billion-dollar projects. And it's just as simple as that. And the fact is that property owners can still receive the vast majority of gains, but they just have to give back a small percentage of that to enable more public infrastructure to be built. So this was out of True Detective, and it summed it up rather nicely. It's just so valuable when you can hear Paul Little, the former Essendon chairman, Toll Holdings, owned a property in Fisherman's Bend, had it rezoned, and I think he pocketed some $20 million on one deal. And there you have it. You know, that's a lifetime's work just on one property transaction, and he's been the middleman that's then sold to another developer, who then has to incorporate that $20 million into all of the apartments he builds on that. And that means anyone who buys into that apartment block has to cut corners to pay the mortgage. So there goes their organic food, there goes their ability to buy the latest green gadgets, invest in solar farms, those sort of things. So it's a massive, massive issue, and both sides of politics are as guilty as each other, if you ask me. So I was going to play you this video. I don't know if it's going to work. It's only 57 seconds long, but we've had trouble with audio. Whoa! Let's see if this works. Oh, it's too slow.
London's Jubilee train line was constructed at a cost of £3.5 billion. The result? A £13 billion increase in the value of privately owned land. Homeowners within 300 metres of each station enjoyed a windfall gain in the value of their property. Each house went up by an average of £200,000. The benefits gained from the nation's taxes went to a fortunate few. If 6% of this increased land value was collected from each landowner over 20 years, the Jubilee train line would have been completely paid for by those who benefited.
So it's a simple concept to understand, really, but it's those percentage deals and figuring out how far politically this can be orchestrated it is the real challenge, because it's so easy for scare campaigns to come out, and unfortunately there's a paucity of modelling on this this whole dimension. So we've got a lot of work ahead of us. Hopefully it doesn't take another 125 years to get somewhere. But here we have in Melbourne the Metro Rail link, and right here in Parkville, I'm sure some of the university administrators are extremely happy, because October last year, Richard Wynne committed the Fisherman's Bend like rezoning of this precinct here, and anyone who owned property probably earns $3 to $4, maybe more $1 million with the tick of that pen. And he had the audacity to call it smart growth, because we had increased density and more walkable communities, so that's smart growth. But it's really dumb planning. It's planning 101 to recognise that you really need a value capture overlay as part of any precinct structure plan to be enacted. So this has put a lot of stress on surrounding taxpayers in the community, and the people in Arden and Macaulay are probably going to be kicking up a real fuss either later this year or early next year, when it's recognised that they're going to be the patsies who have to pay value capture, but the lucky landowners here in Parkville don't have to contribute basically a cent to this $9 billion, $11 billion Metro Rail system. So it's extremely frustrating. There was no discussion, nothing concrete in the latest Victorian budget about value capture. There was still a little bit of money for further exploration into value capture, despite the fact that it has been littered through Treasury papers for the last 5 years, and the Andrews opposition had the Transport 10,000 plan. It was really quite a big prominent part of their proposal that value capture would fund the removal of all the level crossings in Melbourne, will play a significant part. Well, now with the Skyrail protests happening, and the fact that there wasn't very effective stakeholder engagement the whole way through, it really puts us on the back foot, and I dare say is a reason why there's been so much political grandstanding between the feds and state on this. So let's get on to BZE, high-speed rail. You probably know this all off by heart. The key points: that 60% of Australian population within 50 kilometres, $7 billion fare revenue, $2.3 billion operating costs, it's net profit, and interestingly, a 40-year repayment plan. So that, on rough estimates, Melbourne to Sydney, 134, and good for Greens, but what about this opportunity cost? So much money, $134 for a 3-hour trip versus, $67 sort of thing sometimes to fly there. So it's a problem for high-speed rail. Of course, if we had a holistic commons-based taxation system, the carbon tax would be front and centre, providing a bit more balance between those two. But with the use of land value capture, we can help reduce those user fees, because last year Australia's land values jumped by $525 billion. It's just incredible that property prices can jump so much. And the year before that, I think it was something like $380 billion increase in land values in Australia. So to finance all three levels of government costs $517 billion. Local, state and federal. Everything could be funded if we wanted to channel this property bubble away from homeowners and give ourselves all a huge tax cut, and would be politically a big challenge, but there will come a time where so many people are locked out with this increasing commodification of housing that this is going to be more and more prevalent in public discussion. So I'd love you guys to help us try and change this culture of location being something that only investors have a right to, according to Malcolm Turnbull on the 7:30 report last week. They need their economic freedom guaranteed, the rights of investors. I couldn't believe it. So all of our land values are at $4.7 trillion, and this is something that's extremely rare. Basically, the ABS is the only statistical body in the world, the only publicly owned statistical body in the world that still values our land. They don't do it anywhere else on the world, on the planet. It's just crazy that it's so valuable, but so few understand just the oscillations of land values. So it's something that we need to keep on track of, and the ABS has luckily been given a bit of a facelift thanks to Kelly O'Dwyer injecting some much needed money to the ABS recently. But you should also check out another report of theirs, the Australian Environmental Accounting Systems. Australian Environmental and Economic Accounting Systems, I think it's called, but it's like a true cost economics valuation of all of Australia's natural resources, including monetary and qualitative standards for water quality and air quality and so forth. So it's really good, we're so lucky that we do have the ABS to do this. So new infrastructure can add anywhere between 10 to 30% to a property's values. So if you consider that 60% of the population lives within the high-speed rail, 60% of 4.7 trillion, these are pretty broad brush figures, but let's say the related land values to BZE's high-speed rail, 60% equals 2.8 trillion. If we just took the conservative estimate of 10%, and in Jubilee it was close to 25% uplift when they built those 11 train stations in London over a decade ago. We just took 10%, there's 282 billion versus the 84 billion project cost for the high-speed rail. So there is more than enough money. My job is to try and inspire enough cartoonists and comedians to break down this technical tax geekery story until everyone can really talk about this. So the key is, instead of repaying it over 40 years, we can do it over 20. And when it comes to Melbourne's rail loop, of course, Merla, the City Loop rail, had about 25% of it funded through this value capture process. So this is how we could do it. This no losers approach, in a way, which is the politically easiest one, where John Alexander, the chair of the Parliamentary Value Capture Committee, he's been talking to these private consortiums who are volunteering. Look, we can build these new suburbs on the edge of cities. Just give us the land rezoning, and of course we will contribute to your high-speed rail. Now, we don't know what percentage of the project that will be at, but I'm estimating they'll only be contributing at about 10%. Where, quite simply, we could easily have more than 3 times the cost in terms of land value upkick. So it's a very, very powerful mechanism, and I suspect that this no losers approach will still require a high user fee. but certainly we should be able to keep it under $100, you'd like to think. So the key point that's missed, and what people like Kenneth Davidson have done such a good job in Fairfax over the years reminding yourself, is the value of public debt. And part of the neoliberal agenda has been demonising public debt so that it pushes us all into private debt where they can charge higher interest rates and make more money. So we need to get back into this belief of infrastructure bonds. And then with this yearly land valuation that occurs, the LVC component is added to the land value of our council rates. Now, at the moment, we have this bizarre situation where under the council rating system, if you put on solar panels, a water tank or a renovation, you do any improvement to your property, up go your council rates. But if you demolish your home and sit on that vacant land as a land banker, your rates go down. And that's because the rating system is on the land, the site value, and the improvements on the building. And this is part of a global trend that's come out of America to try and encourage depreciation. So property valuers are told to overvalue the building so they can write more off in depreciation, undervalue the land. So it's no surprise that people really despise their council rates. And our problem is that the combination of council rates and land taxes is so low, they only cost about $2,000, $2,500 a year. Compare that to the capital gains on average of around about $60,000 over the last 3 years. That's how much our properties have been going up. So it's not changing behaviour. You think each household is contributing about $20,000 in income taxes alone. Even if we had land taxes per household at somewhere between 8 to 10,000, those 80, 90,000 vacant properties would very quickly be rented out or sold, and we'd have a more realistic relationship between house and land prices and the growth of our wages. But unfortunately, with so many capital gains incentives out there, people are buying based on what they're expecting to sell it for in another year or two. It's not related to our income anymore. So, same thing, but the key point is the infrastructure bonds and the site value component. Canberra's already enacting some of this type of reform with their nation-leading reform to remove stamp duties and replace them with land taxes. So there are three alternatives. The no-losers approach. There was going to be here in Parkville, if you like, above the new train station, they were going to create new skyscrapers, and those titles will contribute money to repaying the rail. That possibly could still happen at Arden. Was going to happen along all of these level crossings where they were going to be removed. They were going to give air rights rezoning above these level crossing removals, but they've gone for Skyrail on the Dandenong line. Let's hope that does change a bit. So the Special Assessment District, this is, if you like, instead of just being around the train station, if we say this word tax is the station, it's a 1 or 2 kilometre radius around there, and everyone within that assessment district pays a value capture fee. That's how they've built the London Crossrail Tunnel, that sort of thinking. Where the business community has recognised they're going to pay value capture just to get the project done. A similar thing with the number 7 line extension in New York. So it is something that happens, but of course anyone who's just outside that assessment district over here gets the windfall, and those on the inside are the ones who are paying. So it becomes a political question how that works. And of course the third one is what we Georgists ultimately want, and that is to ensure that everyone pays a share towards the infrastructure, because like you've probably seen real estate agents talk about at auctions, you too can buy and enjoy this place, and look what comes with it: the free school, the free train station, the free parks, they're all provided for you. Well, the problem is that they're not free, they're incorporated in the price, and you have to pay interest on that for the next 30 or 40 years. And the thing with the land tax is that it will you'll contribute to the upkeep of those parks and schools every year, but at a much smaller rate, and effectively you end up saving about 70% on the mortgage interest bill you pay. So these hundreds of thousands of dollars type decisions in all of our lives, how we've decided to be taxed, and there's very few people left who can tell this story. And because Australia is one of the only nations left with a land tax system, Singapore is the country that is probably doing the best on this front, but there are very few others who are talking about it. So, thank you very much. Let's go for some questions. Yes?
They're very interesting, Karl, and a lot of food for thought there, but one thing that I do have my doubts about, and that is when you draw a comparison between the increased value of land, say within the Melbourne-Brisbane corridor for high-speed rail, if you compare that to the increase in land value along the Jubilee railway line. People who live along the Jubilee railway line are going to be using that service, if not every day, many times a week.
Yeah.
It's a far stretch of the imagination to suggest that someone who lives in Pakenham or in Werribee is going to have their value, the value of their land, increased by 10% as a result of high-speed rail. I really think it's a bit of a stretch.
Certainly I picked the low of the 10 to 30% ratio there.
Even 10% I think is a gross overestimate.
Well, there's been lots of examples around the world where the numbers have been closer to 30%.
But you see, someone who lives in Pakenham might use high-speed rail once a year, twice a year. They're not going to be using it every day.
That's right. And the thing with land values is that the market automatically takes that into place. So someone who's right near the new train station that is connected to the high-speed rail, well, their land values are probably going to go up 40-odd%, but in Pakenham it's going to be relatively less. And so because it's a percentage charge, that takes into account that fact. So it does work itself out. I understand, though, that it can appear that everyone's paying the same, but when you think that that geospatial advantage is incorporated in the bidding war that takes place, and those opportunity costs of whether you want to travel for 50 minutes before you get to high-speed rail is part of the price discount out here in Pakenham. Yeah. I wish I had the modelling though to really show you and go into some of the detail you do in your report, but about a decade ago I told this story to Peter Newman, the Professor of Sustainability at Curtin University. It might have been longer than that, and the light bulb went on and he really is taken to it, and it's been fantastic to see him inspire young academics like James McIntosh, who the Melbourne Transport Forum recently brought here, and he's doing some of the cutting edge modelling on how this price differential would play out. And his story is, look, the majority of the windfall is within the first 300 metres, and that's where it is. And so that's why it's so important to get these air rights incorporated into that 300-400 metre radius, because if that isn't the case, then the public will be losing out. Yeah.
Can I summarise what you said and correct me if I'm wrong? That without a value capture land system, you've actually got a misallocation of resources going on.
Absolutely.
And that's adding, say, for instance, with this room, it's very, very climate change difficulties, because a subsidy of the wrong behaviour going on.
It's
Have I
massive.
got that correct?
Absolutely, absolutely. And so there we are, $525 billion further in debt for some people. All of those on costs just add up and restrict our ability to behave according to the moral requirements of these times. So absolutely. Yep.
Would some simple case studies help you get the message across? I mean, Fisherman's Bend's been a bit of a disaster. People have had to buy back land at inflated values just to put parks in plants.
Yeah, exactly.
I think those kind of case studies would help the argument.
Yes, certainly. Well, the City Rail Loop's fantastic one, where it was 25% value capture funded, and it was paid off at least a decade early. We've got some economic historians working on that, finally digging in the detail on that story to reveal that. Not many people know, but the Sydney Harbour Bridge also had about a 25% contribution from landowners in the North Shore area. James Bradfield, who was the chief engineer, was a strong geologist and ensured that some form of this value capture, which is really the planning term for land tax. So they're virtually the same thing, and it's interesting that the Liberals have cottoned on to value capture, and so many others are talking about land taxes to replace stamp duties, and they're both a picture of each side. But there's a really good book called Wheels of Fortune by Fred Harrison, and he goes through and talks about how many the East Asian economies are using value capture to do what we in the West think is economically impossible, and that's to have a profitable public transport system. And so in Japan and particularly in Hong Kong, the company that actually runs our train line here, MTR, has delivered dividends to their shareholders for the last 14 continuous years, because the government gives them those air rights above new train stations, and they sell the development rights off very quickly to a developer, but incorporated in that is a land lease fee each year. And so as the rents slowly go up, over time they pay back the infrastructure bonds, and the project is funded at least cost economically, because they're using public debt. It's 2% cheaper than the private market. It's repaid as rents slowly increase over time, and it's all done at least cost. So in Japan, I think one study I've seen talks about how Japan has barely raised their ticket prices since the 1980s, because they have the same agreement where basically you come out of a train and walk through a Myers or a David Jones type thing, and they pay a leasehold fee to the entity managing their train development network. So there's lots of examples around the world. Jubilee one's a good one. The Crossrail Tunnel I mentioned in the presentation, that's another one where it was some 25% of the business rates paid for it. So the business community often sees this story and they can come to terms with it, but it's the residential side that where the property lobby really pushes the scaremongering, and that's what kind of impedes its use.
But what that example is, it seems to me the next part, which everyone forgets, is that it actually forces the developer of, say, the rail system to go high quality, because otherwise, within a short period of time, their rents collapse.
Yes.
They had poor things. So, the well-known Sydney apartment complexes of the subtle salmon pink, which are just really lipstick on heads for a building. Most of them are falling apart after 14 years, 15 years. If I'm a railway developer, I don't want my building to be falling apart in 14, 15 years. Do I?
Excellent. Great point. That's exactly what's needed, and that long-term thinking where there's a connection between the community well-being and the private interests is something that the land lease system helps facilitate. So yeah, it's good. Yep.
Wasn't there some suggestion of that when I'm talking about the Chadstone train station? Wasn't there some suggestion there that Frank Lowy that owns that?
Gee, the Gandalfs, I'd love to see them pay some taxes on something like that, because they just had built for them the what's the new Cheltenham station right near Southland? Yes. Southland, yeah, that was built for them basically for free.
Yeah.
And that's a multi-million-dollar windfall for them. So they should know. And quite a few shopping owners do understand this, but yeah, it should be more prevalent. Yeah.
There was one part I didn't understand. If you picture there was that blue building with the two cash points inside at Victoria Market. You said the owner was asking his property valuer to raise the value of the property. How does that benefit the owner?
So they can then go to their bank and say, look, this property's gone up 80,000, my second one's also gone up 80, and so that gives them an extra 10% they can leverage off their next loan to buy their next property.
Yeah.
So that sort of domino effect keeps carrying through, and now there's property options. People can buy with no cash down to buy real estate, and they're using Google Earth to only look at properties that are 800 square metres or bigger. Then they go to the local council website, see the development overlay. Then they find some elderly couple who don't recognise how valuable the land is, and they offer to pay them $100,000 more than the market rates without them knowing it's really worth $600,000 more. And there you go, they've made easy money without putting a cent down within a year. And that's just one of the tricks of the trade that's out there for spruikers. Wait.
Yeah, sorry, I mean the mass transit railway compared with our rail system is a benchmark in terms of operation and maintenance as well, so they get the money from high-rise over the stations. They don't have to screw around when the signalling system needs to be upgraded. They replace it every 5 years.
It's within their interest to keep it top.
Right, isn't it? They want a high-class facility because otherwise they lose their record.
Yeah. And they're the only train system in the world to have retrofitted platform screen doors just to save the environment facility there. So it makes a good case study that people in Melbourne might relate to in the difficulties with the train system that we encounter.
There's a company called Cedar West who have managed to have major land holdings at Footscray West Station and Williams Landing. I think they might have some holdings in Tarneet where the regional rail went through. They also own major holdings around St Albans where the level crossing's being removed, and down in south, somewhere down there where similar sort of things are going on. So I remember being at the Alfred pub just here on the corner a decade or so ago, and hearing some property investors laughing over a beer about it doesn't matter what side of the tracks you're on, as long as you buy near it. So they all know that there's that easy windfall to come. Alrighty, so we're going to see what happens with the federal high-speed rail. It's been pretty well critiqued, but the potential is there with high-speed rail. It's going to be very interesting to see on Four Corners tonight. John Alexander critiquing negative gearing and how it's led to a speculative frenzy in the housing market. So people like he and Turnbull do understand that land value capture can keep a lid on some of those potentials, but the challenge for us all is to try and break down this to a dinner table conversation, because it's certainly used to be pre-World War I and II, but over time it's been forgotten, and there's been this over-reliance on user pays, where people need these $134 tickets rather than it being a $34 user pays ticket, which would cover the marginal cost of operation, but the big heavy lifting for the fixed costs would be covered via this value capture mechanism. So, yes, last question or two.
Sorry, I'm late to come, but I often have people say to me about the Beyond Zero rail plan, who would fund it, how can we fund it? And I have trouble putting it in a nutshell. And I've sort of understood about value capture. It's around the stations that you capture value, and it's an ongoing tax, isn't it, to the owners of that land.
Yes.
Just put it in a nutshell, how the cost of that could be reduced, and the tickets could be cheaper by that. Just say again.
Yeah, sure. So if we took, if we had, where was my basic numbering here? So Australia's land value has increased $525 billion last year. And your report talks about 60% of the population living within 50 kilometres. So if we took our land values, 60% of land values are 2.8 trillion, and then somewhere between 10 to 30% is the usual uplift surrounding an infrastructure project. So if we just took the conservative amount of 10%, and this is over 20 years, it would be 282 billion. So we could pay for it 3 times over, or just take 3% of that uplift over 20 years. So we're in the 0.5 percentage point sort of realm the land value capture charge could be. So you'd still have those user fees as well, but it could be spread out over the lifetime of the asset rather than this being this upfront charge. And that's the problem that freaks out politicians is how to deal with those big, heavy upfront costs of the tunnelling and all that sort of work. So that's where the infrastructure bonds can be so useful, is that the public, with our AAA rating, record low interest rates at the moment, could borrow at a 30-year, sell these 30-year infrastructure bonds, and people would be jumping at it to buy them because they're guaranteed by the sovereign risk is there to guarantee it, and obviously that is the government's right to tax the people to ensure these debts are paid, and that's the highest level of security you can get as an investor. Vivian, follow up?
Yeah, you said it would be politically difficult. So politicians again are talking about the high-speed rail for years, 30 years I think. And when he talks about it, even Turnbull's now talking about why is it so politically difficult? They just outline the speed.
Yes, well, the problem is the asset-rich, income-poor, and that's the challenge. Retirees who can't afford some $5,000 to $7,000 yearly fee towards saying thank you to the government for building this high-speed rail. That sure that they're paying $5,000 or $7,000 a year, but they've probably benefited in terms of windfall gains by $100,000 to $200,000. So it's that disparity that people are so willing to accept the capital gains and laugh about it, but then pay any of that back, and it's a huge impost on them, and outrageous that can go on. So that civic duty and that understanding is something that we need to build. Yeah.
There is a basic. There is a little bit of a flaw in your argument from where I stand here. If you take your family home, for instance, which is appreciated in value, some people look at that and say, gee, I've made a wonderful capital gain. And other people might look at it as if to say, well, it's actually worth more if I realise it, but it's still my family home and this is where I live. So I don't recognise the capital gain for what it is. But with proposed tax, these people are still going to be charged for it. And if they're in retirement or whatever, they won't have to lose cash to pay for it. And what's more, prior to that tax existing, they've probably set up their financial affairs to suit that level of expenditure prior to the tax.
Yep.
And I think that is the key bit of political difficulty, as I see it.
Yes, and it needs some foreshadowing so people are warned that it can happen. But as you saw, that 282 billion, triple the cost. With the numbers I crunched in the total resource rents, we could easily double a pension if we could channel some of this property bubble away from these banking profits, if you like. And so that's one of the ways that we could alleviate this situation. I probably should have put the graph up, but in terms of land taxes, according to the Rethink paper that Joe Hockey put out when he was Treasurer, and a screed of others, land taxes have the lowest deadweight cost and actually adds 10% to the economy in terms of efficiency, whereas stamp duty takes 70%, up to 80% from the economy in terms of every dollar raised. So those sort of differentials could be borrowed against and used as some sort of incentive to help people realise that this is going to encourage a whole pile of positives, including enabling people to be able to move closer to where they work. So there's less need for so much transport because we're not going to have these stamp duties, $36,000, adding to our interest bill and so forth. So there are those sort of options in terms of greasing the wheels, but you're right, that's one of the big challenges we have is, sure, you're going to have this foreshadowing, but then we're going to see what's happened with the mining tax, the pokies reform and the taxi licences, where at a drop of a hat the vested interests will threaten a $20 million marginal seats campaign. And that's one of the real problems we have with our democratic system these days. The lobbyists just have so much power. Yes, back to you.
Seeing you're Economist 101, would you like to comment firstly on, instead of just thinking about the high-speed rail, of a net worth tax? And if anyone objects, you say, fine, if you don't agree with the valuation, we'll sell up everything of yours, and you can buy it back with the cash. And then the other one is turnover tax, which is, or turnover figure, which might be only 0.5% or so.
Yeah.
But that's already done in these big shopping complexes. You are taxed on your turnover. So if you do that, when you look at the total turnover, 1,000 trillion, 1,000 billion is Australia's GDP, which doesn't include the huge amount of voluntary input. But if we covered that, and the turnover tax would get the overseas people covered, and your net worth would cover not only land tax, but possession of any other assets. So can you comment on that?
Yeah, well, I mean, from our perspective, we look at, we come from a strong economic justice front and these natural rights. And when it comes to owning natural resources, that's a huge advantage. And if we just nip that at the pass, then that's where so much of the money to the top 0.01% comes out of these monopoly rents. So it addresses similar concerns, but with a much more direct and doesn't invoke the wealth envy type mantra that the right can so easily critique. So that's why I really love being able to talk to the right wing, that we can have the lowest deadweight costs and compliance costs, lowest tax base, and then to the left on self-funding public transport and true cost economics and affordable housing. So that's why the George's message continues to survive. On the turnover issue, it's like GST, it's regressive, so that those who are buying more, basically a 20-cent GST, a GST charge of 10% on a $2 ice cream takes more of someone on $20,000 wage than someone on $200,000. So it's not progressive, and as you've seen, there's more than enough money there. So we don't need to go on some of these dog legs that are out there. And as you know, land can't be hidden in a tax haven. So
there is actually a successful turnover tax, and that is progressive, and it's called a unitary tax. It's applied in California. And one view is it's being the thing that's financed through redevelopment and the regrowth of the California economy. And it's means you can, it's actually the same thing, because it's capturing, say, from Google, hey, you're getting so much income out of California, this is your percent you've got to pay for California. And that's it. And it's exactly the same, it's capturing the commons of the people are your market. That's the common.
Or you could tax the domain name google.com. That's an incredibly valuable asset. And
I think that
there's a lot of different ways you can come at it.
That would be a more difficult one, but I think the unitary tax, and it's also now got probably an 8 to 10 year history of how it works. And a lot of the loopholes have been cut off and things like that. So, the accountants 101 learn how to make loopholes in it, and now they've got to have done at least 2 PhDs to find the loophole.
Very good.
I'm afraid we've run out of time. I already mentioned that there were some raffle tickets on sale earlier. The prize is one of George Monbiot's books, Heat. The raffle is to support the Beyond Zero radio shows. If anyone would like to buy a ticket before we draw it, would you put your hand up, please, and anyone will wander around and help you out. Okay. Thanks, Karl, very much for a really interesting talk. That's really thought-provoking. We had the opportunity to continue the discussion at the pub down the road, at the front door, down the ramp, and just before the next set of lights. Are you able to join us at the pub, Karl?
For lemonade.
Yeah. There's plenty of lemonade there.
Yeah, good.
All right. And there's good food there too, if you like. Okay, so that's on. I told you a bit about BZE before. What's important about BZE? One thing that's important about BZE is financial support. BZE is supported entirely by donations from private individuals, nothing from business or politics, so it makes it completely independent and it can tell us the way it is. We call these people baseload supporters. They contribute regularly, and if you'd like to become one of those, please see one of us and we'd be very happy to hear from you. You can catch up with the YouTube recordings of these nights and of the radio shows on BZD's website. You can catch up with BZD at the stand at Solar 2016 at Jeff Shed this week, Wednesday and Thursday. The next discussion group is on Monday the 6th of June. It'll be here. And we continued with some economic topics and household bill savings by cutting out gas and going all electric. And to that end, the speaker will be engineer Tim Forsey, who's talking about heat pump air conditioning systems for space heating and cooling instead of gas. So that'll be an interesting talk. We're still selling a few raffle tickets. When we finish, if we take any further discussion outside this lecture room, that'd be helpful, because the security guard will come around at 8 o'clock and he really wants to close up and throw us out. Have we sold enough tickets?
Could I ask Karl to talk?
That's Karl.
Oh, gee, where's him go? C36 purple. C36
C36 purple. Have we got that?
A number ending in 877, I reckon it is.
Can't see a couple of
It's a mobile number, isn't it? Yeah, 0407 428 87, probably 3.
They're not here. Perhaps we could draw another
Yeah,
one.
let's do another one. C41.
What was it?
Careful.
C41.
Yeah, he's got it.
Go.
Hey.
This is for Radio Fund. Karl also has a program at 3CR, and if you'd like to support us during Radio Fund, it's June the 13th that week, second week in June. Just ring up and donate, because this is how we keep this alternative radio and ideas like this, and Beyond Zero gets a public face through that radio program. So please support us if you'd like to donate even as well. They'll give you the prize.